Scott.
Chris.
Rich.
David.
Kokyo. All right. Great.
So I'd like to start by some stories about how I came to be aware of this this practice. Has anybody run across the 8 verses for training in mind before?
This topic.
8 verses for training the mind.
Yes.
Verses for training the mind. It's eight verses for training the mind, and I didn't memorize the history of it completely, but it goes back a ways. But Dalai Lama,
Yes.
I picked this little booklet up. It's meant to be free, and it wasn't. They handed them out. It was about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. And I went, oh, it's something by the Dalai Lama, huh? And then I read it, and it just kind of blew my mind. And it reminded me of something like an epiphany that I had a few years earlier, where I was a new relationship with a client representative that went bad really fast. This was a new client representative for this particular client. And I interpreted what was happening between us as lack of respect for my knowledge and integrity, because I was the professional and she was my client representative. A client that I had a great rapport with. And but she was new, and she put herself between me and the client, and started having me do things that the client never asked me to do, and not doing things that I recommended she do. So anyway, it kind of went bad, and it really played with my head, because I did not want to go around her to the client and say, what is with this person? And I wrestled with it, but eventually I had to, because she didn't let me go to the meetings anymore, at least not be paid to go to a meeting that the client had been paying me to go to every month. So she said I could go make a presentation to the board on my own nickel and speak during the public communication period. So I spent some time drafting something that would kind of explain the situation in a way that wouldn't point fingers or act like I, had lack of respect for this person. It was really hard, because my face was burning the whole time, because I had this insecure fear that they would say, well, just do what she tells you to do. What's your problem? So I worked real hard at it, and I went and I read my letter, because I was so nervous. And then the board said, oh, yeah, we want you to come to the meetings, as you have been. And then the client representative was taking notes, and she wasn't surprised or anything, or apologetic or anything, but I looked at her very carefully, and then I understood that she was just doing what she thought her job was. That's all. New job. She was a typist for the school district before she got this job. So she knew nothing about engineering, or sewers, which was, anyway, to cut that story short, is that when I saw that, I just had a real epiphany that, I totally misread the whole situation. I didn't have to get all defensive. I didn't have to get argumentative. All I had to do was see her from where she was coming from. And from that day forward, we had a great relationship, and she knew nothing of what she put me through. I didn't want to burden her with that. It was just fantastic. And so it was like turning the other cheek, making yourself vulnerable and then not getting slapped, right? It's kind of like, So that had happened, and I thought about the scripture, in the New Testament, turning the other cheek. I had thought about that back at that time. And then I read this. And when I got to like verses 4, 5, and 6, as I went through these and read the commentary and so forth, I just went, wow, this is really like that. And it would be really great to have a practice that would focus on seeing the people that are giving me problems as being a teacher. Hard to do, very difficult. So that was starting with verse 4, but these are all very pithy, with a lot of to them. And the Dalai Lama, basically, by the time you get through reading the commentary, I don't know how many of you have, but on verse 1, 2, and 3, you've had all the teachings on emptiness and the theories about reincarnation. And it's all like, I can't believe you did this job in here in just a few pages. And it's in here too. This happens to be what I got off the web, and it's identical to this for the first 3 verses, and the rest of it is very similar to what's in here. But I brought something that I made as a reminder, a bookmark that can be used for meditation. Let me just take one. It's got verse 4, 5, and 6 on it. So, which is nice to have in my pocket.
You may
have a situation come up and my face is burning, I can go, okay. I can get right to it. What was that verse again? No. So,
Did you make these?
yeah, it's not up there. Process. Anyway, so I'd like to talk about verse 3 first, or 4. That's kind of jumping ahead, and then just turn it over to wherever it goes. Verse 4. When I see beings of unpleasant character, oppressed by strong negativity and suffering, may I hold them dear, for they are rare to find, as if I had discovered a jewel treasure. And when the Dalai Lama's characterization of this verse is we're talking about people that we have aversions to because of their appearance or what we should call superficial things. In other words, we judge a book by its cover, and then we're just like, I don't like that person's accent or the clothes they're wearing or their religion or their race, but mostly he's talking about in here about people, underprivileged people that are outside the regular social network because of problems that they've had. They may be drug addicts, or they might have AIDS, or they might be ex-cons or ill. Instead, an example of following this verse would be like Mother Teresa. The sick, the needy, the ill. Dedicating your life to helping those kinds of people. But from my perspective, a person can be an unpleasant character just a little bit at a time and look like a normal person normally. So when someone is being unpleasant to me, or I interpret it that way, in a particular moment, I take this verse as applying to that person too. They don't have to be someone who, at first glance, I want to veer away from. But I think the commentary would indicate that maybe when we're meditating on this verse, because that's what these are for, is that we look at the kinds of beings that he's describing as kind of a class of people that we could focus on in our lives, say. By feeding the homeless and so forth. They're doing prison ministry, things like that. But I see it as you can apply it to everything. Someone is unpleasant to you, maybe because they're in a real hurry and they're stressed out because, I don't know, they have a sick wife at home or something. You don't know their story. And when they're like that, then if I could just go like, oh, this person is like, really, I need to do something for this person. They just cut in front of me a line, I can say, oh, by all means, take my place. Is there any other way I could, like that? And that's, any of these can be taken in a broad range of directions as far as that goes. But I think well, that's just how I see it. So, any thoughts on?
I was thinking that the people that I found most difficult to hold dear are people that, in my view, are causing harm to others. And then I feel the need, or I do step in and try and limit the harm I feel that they're doing. That's probably the category of people that I have trouble holding dear. And I can hold them a bit more dear afterwards, especially if I've been successful. Whatever I feel they've been doing causing harm afterwards, I can then hold them dear. That's a great learning experience, and I gained a lot from that. And so on, but that's probably where I need to apply myself, hold them dear. People who harm me directly, actually, don't seem to have so much trouble with that. I don't know why. Something, probably some sort of protective mother instinct thing about wanting to protect other people that I think are vulnerable in some way.
When I read this, actually, I was surprised at the simplicity and readability of the language, and so I really appreciated it from that perspective. I think we often, we're reading these really dense texts. It was kind of nice to have something that seems so simple. And yet I found more resistance in myself to some of the things I read in here than I would normally have found in, the sutras or other readings that we're doing. And so I thought that to be really interesting. And the one in particular that really was like, I definitely struggled with was the one about treating others as superior beings. And I understand the perspective of equanimity, but the idea of treating others as superior rubbed me from the social justice perspective. The most obvious aspect of that I can relate to is just being a woman in a male-dominated field and needing to have a level of confidence where that is not does not come natural to me. And then I went on to read that, him saying, this does not mean that you should lower your self-esteem or degrade yourself. But I still struggled with the idea of treating others as superior and how that relates to the practical day-to-day life. I feel like when somebody's vulnerable, when somebody's vulnerable, it seems much easier to apply that principle and they are superior to me. But when somebody is, I don't want to say causing harm, but this is most applicable in my work life. When somebody is not listening or isn't treating you with the respect that you feel you deserve, that angle of being deferent to them is a really hard pill for me to swallow. So I just reflected on that a lot. And then the other, one of the other verses, he talks about squashing thoughts by, instead of like going into the emotion, to instead consider the opposite perspective. I'm not really framing that right, but for example, if I have my feelings hurt, that maybe it's not about digging into why am I so hurt? Why does this matter so much? As it is of considering the other person's perspective, and understanding why they said what they said that hurt my feelings. And I actually found that to be true. Like once I actually reflected on that for a little bit, that really resonated with me. But when I first read it, I had a lot of resistance to that idea. So anyway, those are just a couple of things that came up for me when reading this and applying it to my practical day-to-day life.
I think it's they get progressively harder and harder to swallow. I think these verses are a hard pill to swallow for really taking serious, and I think they're meant to be. I think it's one of the more challenging Dharma teachings I feel like I've ever come across, honestly. And I think that this thing about low self-esteem is an interesting one, because in our culture, I think it's maybe more prevalent than old Tibet. Low self-esteem, and people already are used to putting themselves below others. And it's interesting you mentioned the gender issue, because maybe in these days it was mostly these like male monks giving teaching to other male monks who are like, and I think that the flavor of all of these is directed towards pride and arrogance, and kind of assuming that everybody's really proud, and we're doing these opposite. The instructions are to do this opposite thing just to train the mind into humbleness and opposite. So it's almost like I hear them as going in the opposite direction more than is even realistic, just as a temporary training, because we're so much on the other side of putting ourselves higher. But there may be cases where we're not doing that and people aren't doing that, and then it's maybe not such a good teaching for everybody. And because in the end, this higher and lower thing, it seems like the true Dharma would be more like equality. But I think it's to counteract the tendency to put ourselves higher, to just balance it out, put yourself lower, even though you're not really lower or higher. It's just like skillful means, but very challenging, I think.
I first encountered these teachings a long time ago when I was listening to Tibetan Buddhism, like the Karmapa group, and then I found them very difficult to swallow. That's a good way to put it. Because I found them very hard. I just resisted these pretty fiercely, because I thought they just felt like, well, what I felt like was what I over the years, situations in which I've been faced with, with situations that were frightening or harrowing in some way, and or like personally threatening to me in some way, and it seemed to me that these teachings were saying, don't fight it. Let this happen to you, and happen to you, but sort of like, it's one thing to say. It seemed to me personally that if I said I'm going to allow this to happen to me, is different than saying I offer no resistance to what's happening. And when I say, because when you say that I'm going to allow it to happen, you're still giving yourself some power. But when you say offer no resistance to what's happening to me, even though it's terrifying me, then it seemed to me that, I was encountering at least a glimpse of what it might be like to have no sense of self whatsoever. And in the face of things that are frightening, that's really terrifying. And I've been terrified by trying to practice in that situation, of being in a situation that was very frightening, very scary, and trying to offer no resistance to a point where, you know, it really is terrifying. and these teachings always bring that up in me. You know, I always feel that tremendous challenge of a level of practice that, you know, I've been striving for a long time, but it's still very difficult in the face of real threat to offer no resistance to threat. There's something about that is so primordial and really cuts to everything about our ego and things of a person and protecting oneself and, you know, and being safe and standing up for oneself and trying to protect oneself from being hurt. So it's a very fierce teaching that I still, you know, respect, but it's like, ugh, I wish it wasn't there, you know, like, it's very hard.
I think in these various verses, there are a lot of, the Dalai Lama offers, after giving the teaching, he offers some examples of, well, maybe in this situation, you actually wouldn't do that because it could be dangerous to yourself or someone else. In that case, perhaps you should step in and do something different, whatever seems right. Don't allow yourself to become a doormat. Although it might feel like you're becoming a doormat when you're really not, if you keep your sense of self-worth and you're simply, he suggests seeing the other person as superior to you in some ways, some aspects, and yourself as, and if you think of yourself, of your deficiencies, things that you always said you were going to learn how to do, you never got around to, or habits you tried to break, to build a sense of humility. So I don't think that he meant you should see all people, everybody you encounter as superior to you in every way. That's not what he's teaching. It's a humility practice, a little exercise you go through to kind of tame down your own defensiveness and maybe what could be seen as arrogance, possibly, by someone. I saw how he chose his words so carefully to avoid us developing a self-esteem issue or something like that. But it is really a complicated thing. This is complicated. There are lots of, yeah, but what about in this situation? What about that? But I have to think that in the end, going in this direction is a gift to the people around you. Is taking a step in this direction, closer to this than my natural inclination, I think. That's all I can do. I mean, I don't go looking for teachers. I usually don't realize someone's a teacher until I go through the whole process of getting mad and hating them, and then remembering something and then making amends. You know, so there you go. But when I do that, I go, oh, he was right. So,
Two role models that I've had in my life for the last 20, 30 years have been Gandhi and Martin Luther King. And some of you, a lot of you were at the ML King march this Sunday. And that was so beautiful to see, especially now, not just with women coming to power, but with the climate crisis. This really invitation for us to get past our own preconceived ideas and work together and understand where other people are coming from. And that's one of those, Dalai Lama, one of my favorite quotes from him, like, Chinese, in parentheses, enemies are really my best teachers because they teach me where I'm hung up, where I'm stuck, to prevent me from being able to work with them and with everyone. in the Gandhians and Martin Luther King's sense of love, subject matter power, soul power, peace power.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what we all have and all need right now, individually and collectively, if we're going to save the planet, our planet.
This sense of precious treasure, jeweled treasure. I forget if Dalai Lama says this, but I've heard it also put as bodhisattvas need difficult beings to develop as bodhisattvas.
Yes,
Because a big part of bodhisattva practice is the paramita of patience.
Yeah.
And if people don't annoy us, we don't get to practice patience.
True.
It's just you. There's no training there. So it's almost like the strange bodhisattva perspective, like, oh, a difficult person, yes. Now I can really get to work and do my practice.
There's a great story in the Tibetan tradition about that very thing about some famous Rinpoche of the 13th century or something, a really famous person, had this assistant who was just incredibly annoying. And he was always with them. He took him everywhere. And then someone asked him, why do you have this person all the time? And he said, because he's my teacher, and because I need to have someone like this for me to learn, patience and goodness of people who are difficult.
I think it's Atisha.
Atisha,
Yeah.
thank you, yes.
I have a practical question along these lines. I've never marched with a Buddhist group before in any of these marches, and we've got the Women's March coming up.
Yes.
And so I've been wondering, what is the recommended, like these are recommendations, what would be the recommended practice to how to comport myself as a practicing Buddhist, which I would like to comport myself that way, at a march, where my natural state would be to be quite energized and feel, the solidarity of a movement that I think will help social change. So I would tend to get, excited and
That's great, do that.
What's wrong with that?
well, I think some of that excitement in me is kind of an attachment. I'm just feeling, a little wondering how to do that, because I don't want to just. I don't know. This is kind of one of my first study groups at the Zen Center here, so maybe this has already been discussed. Since I know there's often a group that marches in the various social justice causes. So I'm looking for ideas because it's in 2 days. I won't see you all again, and I would like to be thoughtful about.
I think it is true that some groups get pretty loud, and there's this kind of like da 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 ba ba da, and the Zen Center group tends to be pretty quiet.
Yes.
And I think that's a beautiful example. You can be in the noisy march with, and I think energy is fine, but sometimes it has a kind of aggressive feeling to it.
Yes.
But usually the Zen Center group is just walking quietly and sometimes talking and usually enjoying, even if it's that's with the feeling of the Martin Luther King one. It was that it's like, and usually people, on the sidewalk watching are also kind of just enjoying. It doesn't seem to be such an angry feeling in general. And some of us were talking in that march about maybe we could even, because some groups have drumming and different music, and we thought we could do like, doing like a well-being chant or something to kind of stay focused too, because they just get really chatty. It's more like walking down the street chatting with a bunch of friends.
Yeah.
You forget that it's even a march. So I don't know. The group us were talking about we could have the two handbells, going with it and just walking more silently.
Yeah, I like that, because, I went to the march last year and loved it, but there were many very hateful signs. And, I had a sign, it wasn't a hateful sign. I kind of like that idea of all that you're saying and how to keep it calmer solidarity.
I think of it also as like bearing witness rather than protesting.
Yeah.
Those are two different actions.
Yeah.
Others have thoughts?
The only thought I had, well, a couple of things is, one exception to that is at Pride, we're very colourful and quite loud at Pride, but very playful. All wear sort of colourful things and jump about. The other thing that comes to my mind is that I'm just aware when I go to a march and I'm wearing my rapasu that some people will look at that and think, oh, that must be a Buddhist person or something like that. So I'm kind of aware that I'm there kind of representing something bigger than myself, and then to comport myself in a way that feels respectful of what I am symbolizing and not be so thinking about what I personally might want. Like I might personally want to go and get a cold drink and drink it while I'm walking along, but that doesn't feel quite appropriate to do something like that. So I just have that kind of awareness if I'm wearing my rapasu, which I like to do. I think it's really good for people to see this, and they don't know what it is, and then they ask, and then you say, oh yeah, it's a Zen center here in Santa Cruz, it's on School Street.
Well, first off, I just want to thank you, Anise, for your comments in the beginning. I think it's always good for us to be aware of gender and gender role expectations. And, appreciate your bringing that into the room. With regard to the fourth verse and unpleasant people, I really try to bring my best self, my best bodhisattva self, to dealing with people who are unpleasant. I have plenty of opportunities at work, in the neighborhood, with myself. And something that I realized is kind of interesting about the way I approach situations like that is, when something like this happens in public or in a situation where there are other people around, the way I conduct myself generally comes from a genuine place, and I do try to allow their unpleasantness and still approach that with some loving kindness of some sort. But there's something that I have to admit that is easier for me to make that effort to a greater extent when there's someone else around that I'm hoping will notice how fair I'm being, how patient I'm being. And it's kind of a conundrum, because I realized at the time, I'm kind of aware of that person who's listening to me quietly or listening to me keep my cool with this person, or maybe it's in a line at the grocery store or something, and I offered to do something, let them go ahead of me in line or something. I'm kind of aware who's witnessing this. It doesn't mean that's only motivation for doing that, not at all. But it's there, and sometimes it makes me feel like I question my devotion a little bit and my motivation, because I am wanting to see if anyone else is noticing that. Not just for my own benefit, though, but for reasons that maybe I can teach them something by being this example. So it's not only that I want them to go, oh, isn't that guy cool? He's really keeping his temper. But it's also like I'm hoping that they're going to learn something from that. And it just seems like it takes a little bit away from the purity of that experience, because there's a little bit of way-seeking mind, some attachment to being seen or teaching something out there in the world. An interesting observation I have.
That's all. Can I respond to that? I think it's really wonderful that you noticed that. I think that almost every human being does that, because I think it's sort of built into us in some way or other. We were looking back at this and saying, oh, how am I doing? We all do that. I think that what a practitioner does is that he notices that, he or she notices that, and the mere fact of observing that is practice.
Yes, yeah.
The mere fact that you acknowledge to yourself that, oh, I'm doing this little weird thing that we all humans do to make sure that I look okay, is something that most people don't do, or avoid trying to look at themselves. So I think that, I don't think you should pat yourself on the back necessarily, but I think you should realize, that that's practice. And in observation, you are practicing. You're practicing Buddhism. You're practicing the way. So I wouldn't get on yourself in any way like that. Just, you see it, and the seeing it is itself, it's undoing in a way. If you didn't see it, if you didn't notice it, then you would be deluded. But you're not. You see that. So that's about the whole thing.
Also, I think I heard two different things. One is like kind of wanting to get the credit and wanting people to think that you're a good person. But then close to that is this thing of like wanting to set a good example. And that is actually, I think, the Bodhisattva vow, right? It's like, because others are around, we maybe do have a higher standard for ourselves. And I see what you're saying, that it's like, it can go either way.
Yes.
There's some self in there, and yet it's appropriate. It's almost like it's a good thing to try to actually want to influence others. I mean, it's sometimes how they talk about the Bodhisattva vow is a vow to influence others in all kinds of ways and change others' minds. And so it's just the more we want to do that, then the more easy it is to get caught in wanting the credit for that. So,
where's that line?
Yeah.
What's helped me, because I grew up with a strong inferiority complex and then tried to make up for it. Patrick gave a wonderful talk that some of you may remember a couple of years ago on leaking ourselves to make other people notice us and feel good about us and like us. That is my problem. And he basically invited me to observe myself when I might be leaking, and to turn that around and listen more and empower more than leak. And that's been very helpful when I remember. So it's right along where you're coming from. I think most of us have many of us have that same problem. Compensatory life. Thank you.
So I definitely had, like everybody else, a lot of resistance going down this list. And for good reason, because it really cuts to all of our relationships, everybody that we deal with every day. And kind of to your guys' point, I read these and I think, well, where have I not done one of these actions, not made myself feel good or above somebody else in at work or at home? And how do I feel? How do I put myself in a lower position to see them as a teacher? And I remember something about, I don't remember where it's from, but one practice is pretending everybody is enlightened except for one person. The one person is you. So somebody yelling at you, teach them and they're there to teach you. They're Buddhas teaching you how to be in the world. But I also think that, and Ace, you had a great point that I didn't even think about when going down this list about when somebody's been repressed or put down. How do you practice with that? And I take these verses as signposts, like trying to show us a way. But my goal in practice is to make it effortless, to not have to think about. If I notice that I'm reacting to somebody in a different way than I used to react to somebody, and it was an effortless interaction, then I think that's progress. And like you're saying, the awareness of it, Scott, like you were saying, the awareness of that is the part that I don't want to beat myself up about. Just the awareness of it. The fact that I didn't accomplish the practice isn't necessarily the goal, just the awareness, like you're saying, because the goal is to have all this happen effortlessly in our daily life. When we're trying too hard, at least I tend to beat myself up about it. I'm not a good Buddhist. I was too loud at the march. I shouldn't have done that. That I try to not beat myself up too bad. Because these are tough practices.
There's more context for these teachings that I find something that is a little less easy to sort of dismiss, and that is, I lived with a person who's Latino, and I've seen him disrespected 1,000 times by white people in stores and everywhere. Here in Little California, I can imagine how it is elsewhere. This is Little California. I see it all the time, and living with a person of color, I've had the privilege and the pain of observing what it's like for a person to be disrespected on a frequent basis, and dismissed, and not seen, invisible to others, and I have no real quick insight about that, but I think there's a social justice aspect to being, to this experience of someone treating you unjustly. And you notice, there are very few people of color in our particular lineage. It's almost all white, not entirely, but almost not entirely white. So there's some aspect of social justice that I think that we really haven't gripped yet about what it's like to be a person of color in this country. And there may be a reason why there are not more people of color in our way. I mean, we don't really reach out to them. We don't really try, I don't think, to make this a place where where they feel comfortable. But I know for a fact that that people of color are mistreated every day, and disrespected, and not treated well. And for them, these teachings would be really even more bitter pill to look at. And not a matter of viscerality, but a matter of extreme pain and even fear. So I just want to bring this up as something that's worth considering in our world. Most of us live a somewhat privileged life and have not had the experience of being routinely, daily almost, treated like crap. And we might respond differently to our world, and if that was our experience, and these teachings might be even more difficult to trust and respect, if that was our daily experience. That's all, folks. I just bring that up.
Yeah, good point. Some people feeling oppressed and they would read these verses like, what kind of practice is that?
Yeah,
That's not something I want to be into.
I mean,
Because-
they're already having to lower their head and stay out of the way.
Mhm.
I know a good friend who's black and like 6'4", and I've seen that man look small. He's learned how to, in the company of white people, look like he's a little man and bends down and keep himself from being too visible. And I recognize what that's about, because he's been hurt many, many times and and disrespected. And so it's a different vision of the social justice aspect of our society, and those people deserve our help and our compassion and our wisdom. I'd love to see more attempts by our lineage, by our teachers, by our organizations to reach out to those people who are suffering in ways you can't imagine on a daily basis. So
I'm glad that you bring it up in this context too, because I was thinking also that the word justice was coming up around this teaching and thinking, oh, this is a teaching that to accept injustice. One could look at it that way.
right.
It's like
That's what I saw. I thought, okay.
yeah, it kind of like which for privileged people is a good practice, I think, to accept the injustice that's coming to them, right? But that so for a lot of the world it's not good to accept injustice. And towards oneself, it's tricky, because I think they're always about this kind of teaching is always about oneself. But I hear it as saying things are not fair, and it's really like accepting that things are not fair in this world is a kind of dharma, but that's only one side of the story. It's not just about accepting that things are not fair, especially when it applies to others. Yeah.
I have a question. I'm really trying to understand more how subtle women have been mistreated and how we may have experienced that and what, I don't know.
Well, that's why I made the comment I made earlier.
Yes, I know.
Because,
Yes, right.
And it's not, not as though you can compare being a woman to the injustice
But I
that a
think in a
black
way
person might
you
feel.
can, because it's much more subtle and much more prevalent because we're half women.
Yeah, there are really subtle ways of communication that it manifests itself.
Can you give some
There-
examples?
Yes, certainly in my work life, I think one of the most common examples is when a woman may propose an idea, often in language that is much softer than or less assertive than a male might, and then the idea gets co-opted by a male who basically represents the idea as
I
his,
see that happen.
often within the space of a minute or less, and then the male is given credit for the idea.
And the woman shuts up.
And it is what it is. That's, I think, the most common way that it happens. I honestly, most of the time when that happens, as long as the idea is being implemented, I let it go, because it's not worth fighting. And you also, it could affect your career advancement. So it's sort of acceptance of a social injustice that happens on a daily basis. But I don't think it's comparable by any means to the kind of the inbred racism that exists even in our own community, where we're severely segregated and don't really see color in a way. And I think that the first step towards equanimity is actually seeing the other, as you have represented the other. To not see, to say that you don't see color, that you don't see gender, and that everybody's equal is actually an injustice.
Because we have that sudden preconditioning running the world.
Yeah,
And reactivity.
it's just 2 cents.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. I guess what your comment has made me think about is I have not been in the working world that much. I was mostly a stay-at-home mom. And what I have found that bothers me is, as a mother, this same idea of like people, like I will say an idea in the family. And this was, when my 3 children, from little, and now they're all adults from 33 to 40. And I was into Buddhism, since college. So I've always just been very much wanting to follow this path. And so I often would have an idea, and somebody would, within a few minutes, kind of claim it as their idea, or just kind of not listen to, something I had offered.
No, are they males or female?
2 males and my husband and 1 daughter. But I think my daughter was kind of similar. There wasn't, so I think I'd apply it to all 3 of my children. But the family was often the 2 boys at the dinner table, they took over. That was often I had to say, hey, sister, the middle child, your sister has something to offer here to talk about. And there was quite a bit of just, running over her and not letting me or her be in the conversation, because we did have family dinners, And I think I erred on the side of knowing that they were probably doing this because they had some insecurities. And, I don't have that many insecurities. I feel like I can empower people. And so, I would just kind of let it go. And, I was curious if this would help people, if I let it be their idea or I let them have the table. And I really didn't didn't try to take time for myself. I did try to give time for my daughter, which that didn't work very well either. But I guess what I found over the years is it was okay for me to do that for a while when they were little, but it really has just continued. You know, it has not at all stopped.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're all 33 to 40. So I feel that kind of, that's too bad, you know, that it happens that way for a lot of mothers and other women too, I think. It's not just a family dynamic.
Yeah.
And it's pretty hard to change it.
Yeah, it's quite subtle in a sense because,
It feels very cultural.
Yeah. Maybe, do you have anything from the Zen point of view?
I was just thinking, I don't think of myself very gendered very much these days. I don't sort of distinguish myself just in my own head very much. But I do think one thing that women particularly experience that men don't experience hardly at all, although a little bit, is just fear of sexual violence. And all women all know from a very early age all about what they need to do to try and protect themselves. And it's never really very far from our minds. I mean, it just comes up multiple times for most women most of the time. And I think a lot of women have very little awareness of that.
Yeah.
It's just not in their minds. They're not thinking about it. It's just not even coming up. So that's a whole 50% of the population has a certain type of experience that the other half is largely unaware of. And that's kind of very interesting. And I think all the conversation that's happening now is very good at helping men to be actually the ones to start having conversations themselves about how do you stop this? You don't talk to women about what they need to do. We need to talk to each other about what we need to do.
Yeah.
Like men are doing that now, and that's just so great. And the only other thing is that concept of mansplaining, which I think is such a cute word. Mansplaining, when men explain to you something that you already know
I've never heard that
perfectly
term
well.
before.
Like you say something, you say something,
Mansplaining.
you say something, and then the man interrupts you and explains it back to you, and you're like,
How do you spell man explaining or
it's
mansplaining?
men explaining to women about stuff that women already know perfectly well.
That's a shortcut, John. Mansplaining.
Yeah.
Mansplaining, yeah.
I will say that having two daughters definitely opened my eyes a lot to, now I have that, and they're very small right now, but, I have that fear for them when they grow up. And, and, seeing them in that light, and, my youngest daughter was talking about a little boy who, they were playing on the playground. It's one of her good friends, and he touched her on the butt, kind of thing. And okay, what do I tell her? How do I tell her how to react? And with the conversation that's going on in our culture right now, I felt the need that we need to talk to the little boy to make sure he understands as well, in a conversation that I wouldn't have had maybe in the past had not all this everything come up. I'm having now, because it is you're right, it's the men who need to learn at an early age. We've been so focused on teaching women, or telling women, the victims, how they should react, who they're supposed to tell, what they're supposed to do if that happens. But really, the blame is
Us men need to talk.
the blame is on the other side of the coin. So I appreciate your guys' input on this, and this has been a really good conversation. So thank you.
Going back to what you said earlier, I know that I'm highly aware when I'm out, like out in the street, or I'm doing something, or even in the office sometimes, and I'll be like in a corridor, and a woman will walk, the other way, and I'll be out in the street, like in a parking lot, and a woman in by herself, and she sees me, and I realize I can feel her feelings, that she's afraid. And it's always a little shocking to me, that she's afraid. And so I'm not going to go, I can't, out of my way to, to do little signals to indicate I'm safe, I'm not going to hurt you, but I'm sure we've all had experience of it being out someplace and a woman being, nearby someone we don't know, walking on the street or whatever, and feeling their fear just because of the fact that you're stronger than they are and they don't know what to expect.
And actually, a great simple thing that men can do is becoming aware of that. When they're walking, you can just think, there's a woman and I'm walking behind her. She's probably slightly anxious. You can just do a simple thing like cross the street. You can just, or you can get past quicker and then be in front, and then she's fine. Okay, he's ahead of me now. There's little simple things like that that men can do. It's just developing an awareness that women overall are physically weaker and have had to deal with this from an early age.
Yeah.
And just developing that and starting to, put your head in, imagining yourself being them. How would it feel to be having someone walking 7 feet behind you? It doesn't feel good. So it's great that I think men are talking about this, about how they can do these sorts of things, just to make it a little easier for us.
It's about time.
Yeah.
I do notice, I cut my hair short maybe through 2 or 3 years ago. And I had it, normal length with, styled fade and all that kind of stuff before. And I do notice a big difference now if I dress down, if I'm in, just dress down clothes, don't look very nice. I don't have a button up shirt. I do notice a lot more fear, from people. So, and kind of like you, Nettie, I don't really see myself or identify myself as Hispanic or Latino or Mexican, but I understand where that the other person's afraid of me. They don't know me. They don't know. I'm a nice guy. And I sense that, and I do that. I'll walk slower behind somebody who's I can tell is tense, and it's just conditioning. I don't try to get too worked up about it, but something I've definitely noticed.
So I don't know if your background is Hispanic. My mother was Hispanic, and I grew up in a culture of self-denial, assimilation because of that, because she married a white man. She had these children who she was trying to protect from discrimination. But one of the things that I've noticed is somebody who's familiar and partly raised in the Mexican culture is difficulty making eye contact, particularly with men, and particularly with men who have brown skin. So, yeah, and so another thing that is, I think, really helpful in understanding the context of women is to not force eye contact, or to not have prolonged eye contact if you sense a nervousness. But what you said brought that up for me, because I realized looking at you that it was raising those emotions and that awareness of the difficulty in actually looking at you. And that maybe that, even though you might associate it with a difference in haircut, that maybe there's partly that is what might be behind it.
And I've actually considered, maybe I should just grow it out again. Maybe I should not have it short to help others. Because I'll be at a party and I can tell the room's different than it would have been if I had a different haircut or dressed a different way. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Definitely interesting.
Wow. But you're noticing, that's the point.
Yeah, I'm noticing. Yeah, but I try not to identify with that so much. Like that person doesn't like me for that reason, because there's also a bad path that I could go down. And something I noticed during sesshin, my first few times is nobody really looks at each other. Everybody's looking down and in their own space. And I just make up stories about people, like that person must be really mean. Oh man, they just look angry all the time. Man, there's something going on. And then after the session's over, everybody's like, "Oh, hey, where's the food? Let's mix it. Let's spread it out." And everybody's just happy. I'm like, "Well, you're totally different than I made. The story I made up in my mind about you." So I recognize that own capacity to judge people without knowing them, and I try to remember that when I make up my own story. That person doesn't like me because of my short haircut. Poor me. It's not good.
I appreciated when Sally mentioned about the dinner table growing up. That I was kind of surprised to hear it. I thought that was a great perspective. Like the boys and the men that are like all talking and taking over, they probably just felt insecure. I thought, and that was great. And he said, you felt kind of secure, so you could be more quiet. And I thought that's a really kind of a bodhisattva perspective. If you can, sincerely really feel that way, it could, of course, easily slip into a denial or something. But I thought, how great, and maybe that's this conversation about gender is, you could say, what looks like the strong men that are taking over and taking the ideas for themselves and so on. It's because they're the insecure ones. and the women or the bodhisattvas are like, okay, they can have the idea. Because we're okay as we are. We don't need to like assert ourselves and get credit for everything. So, I mean, there's an edge there, of course, a danger, but I thought, if you really do feel, I think that's what the spirit of these verses is kind of about. Like, they're like, I think they could be healthy mind training verses if one feels secure in oneself or confident in one's own Buddha nature, that one can just, eat the blame, as they say, or offer the victory to others and so on. Then it could actually be a joyful thing, potentially. In outside of all these situations that we've kind of gotten into the sort of the other side of racial and gender inequality and so on, where I think these verses wouldn't apply.
Yeah.
But the places where they could, I think, does have to do with this feeling of feeling okay in oneself, not having to do that boy takeover thing. But then, like you say, maybe you did feel confident and okay, but now, decades later, it's kind of like, oh, well, it was okay, but I feel like maybe they kind of missed something. They kind of missed me expressing myself.
Well, I think they've missed women in general expressing themselves. And just a quick example of that is not one of the two boys who are 40 and 33, or my husband, has asked my daughter or I during the whole Me Too news info, did that ever happen to you, Mom or Kate? Have you guys ever felt? Has that been a problem for you? And I find that not only hurtful to me and to my daughter, but I find it,
Do you think they don't care or don't want to know, or what do you think? Why that is?
I think, well, I'm not sure. I can't read their minds. I kind of see it as cultural or afraid to maybe open a can of worms, because my daughter and I both said, yes, we've, experienced harassment, and I think they kind of don't really want to hear about it.
They don't want to know. In a way, it's like painful to know that somebody you love has been such a victimized. Maybe is that?
I'm not even sure if it's somebody because they love us, or it's just they just are kind of like just don't want to go there, you know. I don't think they've ever had committed any harassment. I don't suspect that at all of my sons or my husband. I just think that they just kind of all grew up not sensitive enough to women, you know, that's why I appreciated your question and this discussion, you know, when everybody is so open and, you know, generous to us all learning from each other.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you know, this would be nice if this would happen at family dinner tables in the world. But I don't think it happens that much at family dinner tables.
Maybe you can start.
I could be braver.
Maybe also it could be like that kind of guilt thing that we talk about, white guilt. And it's kind of like, it's such a big topic that when we really get into it, it's kind of like, oh, well, it's almost too much.
Yes, yes. I think that's.
You can start small though, with small stuff.
So just things like this march and the country's response in the last year may be actually really hard for all the men in the country, and maybe not all, but it may be like, oh, there's this whole area that we didn't realize how painful it is, and ignorance is bliss.
Because now it's all coming out, like, you know, like, so world under the rock is sort of like, so it seems like in this country, men in power, that's what they do.
Yeah.
In every field. I mean, we've seen this now coming out in every industry, every field.
Yeah.
Men of, you know, white men almost exclusively who have power over others, taking advantage of women. And it seems to be like the perk. You know, this is the perk you have. Of course, you know, that's been the way it has been for many, many centuries. I mean, you look back at, you look back at European history. If you're a king, if you're a prince, you know, you take the women that are, you know, the women that are there in the castle, who are the women in English household, you know, of a high class. The servants were available. And no one could question it. And that's been that way for a long, long time. But I think what we're seeing now is so ugly in terms of this assumption by men in power that, hey, I can do this and I'm going to do this. You know? Like, wow, what went wrong?
And also, you know, that line that you mentioned is just, it's so interesting to me where that line is, because of the Bodhisattva way of saying, you know what, it's okay, it doesn't matter, and then the other side of the line being doing that in a situation where it's not appropriate to do that. So many women, probably most women who have experienced harassment, never say anything. And it's because, you know, there's this, well, and not even that, it just doesn't even occur to you that it's an injustice.
Think how it is.
I've experienced many situations where it's only days later where I said, wait a second, that was inappropriate. I should have said something. And so it's not even a matter of necessarily being conscious of a bodhisattva way as it is of I'm not sure how to articulate this fully, but there's definitely a line there, and seeing the line is really difficult.
Yeah, you're in the middle of it, right? You're like swimming in it, right?
Yeah.
Also, part of the bodhisattva thing is the vow to help everybody awaken. So part of the oppressed's role as a bodhisattva could be to point out the oppression. But this is where the line gets really strange too, because it's almost like, ideally, if it was purely bodhisattva vow, it would be to point that out just to benefit the other person, not for one's own, sense of self injustice or something. So that's where it gets, I think, even trickier. Ideally, it's more like, and that's what these verses point so radically to, is like, if it's just a sense of self, of no self, and it doesn't really have to benefiting the other's part. But I think that's always the problem. If we always take the lowest position, then the people who take the highest one don't get to learn how they're actually causing harm. Yes.
I was just thinking similar things about what could be the distinction if someone harms me. If from a bodhisattva perspective, maybe if I respond to that injustice by trying to stop it for the sake of everybody else, so that that person won't continue to have bad karma by doing that bad thing, and that other people won't get subjected to the same thing. Maybe that's partly the distinction. Whereas if my reaction was just to just for myself personally, like, don't do that to me, and angry feelings and wanting to, I don't know, teach that person a lesson or something, then that wouldn't be in the spirit of this. But maybe in still having a strong action to try and stop the injustice, but it not being personal.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a way that we could still. We still can accept the defeat. Just personally, we can take that defeat. And now, for you and you and you, I'm going to take some action over here. I don't have it. This is not clearly thought. I'm just thinking aloud.
I
I
think that's very important. At the dinner table, had I thought more like that, Nettie, I might have said, "Now wait a minute, you guys. How do you think it affects all women if just men are talking at the table?"
Yeah.
Mhm.
But that's
And I never said that.
Yet.
That's right. I still have plenty of time, Dave, and there will be many opportunities for me to do that. And that's why the dialogue is so good, because even those of us who come with such heart and caring about each other and all people, it's hard to figure this out. And this whole all of the social injustice and issues are just very difficult to find, that path of how to do it, like what you said about being in a room and people are afraid because of your haircut.
That's my story.
How can I help with that?
Been waiting a long time here.
I've been there.
There's a little meditation out of the book, many meditations, the book, The Wise Heart by Jack Kornfield. And so I actually made a little card like this with it. But it kind of sums up all this stuff in a real simple way. And one of you said that, oh, I saw something real simple in there. And it's the simplicity of it. And it's may I meet the suffering and ignorance of others with compassion.
Yeah.
That's the simple truth that we should follow in all our interactions. And it might mean one of many different possible actions, but if we're meeting it with compassion, it will be the right one. So I'd like to simplify it. I've just been trying to get that out for about a half hour.
Another maybe summary too is of all verses is not taking it personally. Which and that's I think what you were expressing. We don't take it personally, and then we can express very energetically something to help others.
To respond with compassion, you have to understand where the person is coming from. That establishes, or you have to try to understand. That establishes a means for communication with the person who's, if he's angry, if he's hating, if he's violent, he's obviously suffering because anger is pure epitome of suffering. So when you say suffering, you don't necessarily mean, oh, look, he doesn't have a place to stay, that kind of suffering. Anybody that's getting in someone's face is suffering and needs compassion.
Yeah.
Compassion is the only way to relieve that person of suffering. And maybe we're not capable, maybe probably I'm not capable of doing that, but a tiny percentage of the time. But just as a little example, this is how I turned my marriage from a marriage of constant bickering to one of love, because I decided that I was going to be the one that would give in first in every disagreement. And it didn't mean I had to do things Elaine's way, but I had to stop fighting about it and getting defensive about not being respected, not having my position listened to. I just finally just stopped. And it was this that gave me the faith that it would work. So by stopping fighting back and having my ears burning and feeling like I was right and wanting to go complain to somebody about what stupid argument I just had with my wife, I would just read that or something like this or something and think about it for an hour or half an hour or 5 minutes, or maybe just remember it. Finally, after doing this for years, maybe just remember where I can find it, and then I would just smile and sit down and start reading a magazine or something. And then my wife would come out of the kitchen and go and apologize to me. And I didn't do anything except stop fighting and develop a pleasant demeanor because I was happy again. I was sad because I had taken it that far, but as I did this more often, I took it less far until I can't remember the last time I did it. Now it's gone. And so she was my teacher.
Oh, you'll knew better.
She was my
Be your
teacher.
teacher.
Thank you for that, Rich. And thanks for bringing this topic. It was a great discussion. And went in all kinds of places we didn't expect. So next month, anybody here like to bring up a topic?
Can I actually ask you ladies to follow up, the three of you, and prepare